How do you scale your business without investment? How does your second startup journey differ to your first one? We're going to get into all of that with our speaker today, who has found and sold 2 businesses without any external funding. Her first, the marketing practice, a top 20 technology marketing agency, which she exited in 2010. Her second, customer Thermometer, a product that makes it simple for companies to source feedback whilst making it fun for customers to use, which was acquired by Exclaimer Group, one of the fastest growing software companies in the UK, just last year. So we're going to get into her story, the ingredients to her success, and what she's focusing on now. It is with absolute pleasure that I introduce you to our guest for this evening. Please give her a big round of applause. It's Lindsay Willott.
Hello.
I'm excited about this.
I know.
Hi,
it's
Lindsay.
It's like being on Ellen.
I love that. Okay, so first of all, happy anniversary.
Thank you very much.
It's been a year since her company got acquired.
Yes.
Very exciting. What was it announced a year ago, or did it actually happen a year ago?
It actually closed a year yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was not sleeping at all this time last year.
What has this last year been like for you?
It's been very, very tumultuous, I would say. It's a real mixture of highs and lows. So, you know, the thing that you spend so long creating a business to do, you know, to sort of sell the asset, to take it forward, to have an exit that works for everybody, you focus so hard on that I don't think, and a lot of people will say this, but you don't think what's on the other side of that. You're just focusing on making that happen. And I think as soon as you do decide to exit, or you do decide to take a business to sale, that's an all-consuming process. The guy who bought our business, the CEO of that business, said to me it's like being in a fire hose for a couple of months because of the due diligence and the experience of doing that. And it was. And you've also got to keep selling and keep the business where its trajectory for the point at which it closes, which you're not sure exactly when that's going to be. So it was full on, but I think the minute you exit, you sort of have this view that life will become easier, and there will be this kind of sunlit uplands on the other side. And it's been a really interesting ride, because the company that we exited to is an exceptional business. They're growing incredibly quickly, but as a result, you probably don't realize quite how fast that pace is when there's kind of 10 of you and 200 of them. So fitting into different structures, being able to sort of understand the team dynamics and how to best be part of that, because the team and I have got a couple of years to sort of roll with the earn out and everything. That's quite an experience to go through, and it's really, really good for you. But when you've been an entrepreneur, I mean, I started my first one when I was 24, so I've got a boss now, and I have to ask for holiday, and that's quite weird. So I think those are the things that I didn't expect to happen, that have been quite challenging, really. But at the same time, to have an exit to a business this big that's doing so well, that will probably be one of Britain's next unicorns, is astonishing. And you have to take the rough with the smooth, but it's exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Did you manage to go on a holiday after the exit?
No, because of COVID.
Not yet? Oh, yeah, of course.
So, no, the day the deal, this time last year, we were all in lockdown. So you just had a cup of tea and went, okay. It was quite weird. It's quite weird.
Okay, cool. Well, we're going to get into all of that acquisition stuff a little bit later. I really want to start off with a little bit about you and your background. So let's talk about your early life. Where did you grow up? What did you study? What did you get up to?
So I am Welsh. I grew up in Wales, and my father ran the oil refinery on the west coast of Wales for many years. And then when I was 11, he walked in and went, "Hey, we're moving to Canada." And I'd known nothing since rural Wales at that point in time, and he'd been offered a job running an oil refinery in Canada, and we moved out there, and I loved it. I mean, I'd gone from rural Wales in the early 80s. There was like one type of breakfast cereal, and there was 3 TV channels and S4C. And then you got to America and it was like Oreos and like, it was so cool. Pickles, which are my personal weakness. So it was an amazing experience. I do wonder whether that sometimes started me on the journey I got on, because you notice different things about just the way people sell. When, I've read a couple of articles that say that sort of immigrants will often start businesses, Elon Musk, various other people, because they see a culture in a different way. And although, I kind of went out and came back again, which I'll come on to, I do remember walking through supermarkets and just noticing stuff that you probably wouldn't notice if you'd grown up there your entire life. So I ended up in Canada, did a couple of years there, went to various different schools, found that quite stressful at that point in time. Just being moved from school to school at that age is weird. And then my dad didn't like the job. So he said, we're going to go to Dallas. J.R. Ewing was all I knew about Dallas at that point in time. So we ended up there. I didn't go to school there. My mum home taught my brother and I. And then he did some training there and he opened the UK office of that business in the UK. So we moved to Henley-on-Thames, which was again a bit of a culture shock after all of that. I then did my IB, the International Baccalaureate, so I didn't do A-levels. I did the IB, and then I went to Warwick University and did English and American Literature. So that was my kind of journey early on before I started working.
It's interesting what you said about immigrants more likely to start business, because there's actually some stats about that, isn't there? And some of it's around just naturally they're risk takers, or their family is when they go somewhere else, and it must be all that transition stuff. And actually quite a lot of people say when they go travelling they come up with some business ideas. It's almost like similar kind of situation, just experiencing so many transitions so early on in life. So you studied English literature.
Yeah, English and American Lit.
What did you want to do back then?
I wanted to be in publishing. I really, really wanted to work at something like the OUP. I'm a massive reader, and that's what I wanted to do. But as I went through university, I decided that I liked the creative element of some of it. It was more about how were books put together, the typefaces and all of those sorts of things. And for some reason, that ended up leading me to a path where I really wanted to do advertising. So I tried to get into advertising in London, but it was just all a bit too cool for me, really. I remember going to a few interviews and thinking, oh God, I look back on it now. It was just one of those things.
What do you mean by too cool? Like, what do you mean?
It was, when you go to an interview wearing your mum's suit. It was one of them, yeah. It was a very different world, and I also think it was quite sort of cannon foddery. They would pay you very little, they would fire you at the clients, and it was sink or swim really. I just don't think I was ready for it. Having moved around the world, I was relatively naive. I don't think I realised quite what they were looking for, even though I knew there was something about that creating of stuff that attracted me. So I ended up taking a job with the local software company, which was a CRM software company, sold into banks. I remember thinking, this is, it's good money, it's software, it'll be fine, but thinking it might be a bit boring, and I loved it. I ended up starting there as soon as I graduated, and I wrote all their brochures in the days when people had brochures. But again, I got to do print, I got to do fonts, I loved it. And then that company grew to be, I think I started, it was about 200 people, and it grew to be 1,000. Wow. Very, very quickly. So it's dot-com boom. This was like 1999, I guess. And it grew very, very quickly, and it ended up being real darling of the stock market. And then I got a phone call from the lady who ran PR, who said, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah. And she said, we've just put out an RNS statement to the city. There's been a gigantic amount of accounting fraud. Share price went down 93% in a day, and they made almost everybody in the business redundant. So it was the same time as Wellcom and Enron and a lot of the sort of corporate white-collar crime things that were happening. The FSA threw the book at the directors. 2 of the 3 of them went to prison. They went to Brixton. It was all over the front page of the FT. So I was faced with the choice of staying with the private equity group that bought the company out to try and bail it out with 100 people left and a brand that had just been destroyed, or starting something new at 24, or taking a job. And I went for a few interviews, and I just thought, I don't want to do this all over again. By the time that had happened, I was already running global marketing for them, and I just wanted to go and create something. And marketing's great because you do a lot of creation, but you're creating something off the back of something else. And so, yeah, I went and started the marketing practice because I literally didn't know any better and I needed some money. And that's about as much thought as went into it.
So that company that you worked for, how long were you there? So it grew quite quickly. How long?
Just under 4 years.
And under 4 years it grew to that team. And do you think a lot of the time people who work in startups that grow quite quickly, they end up wanting to start their own startup? Do you think that you were inspired quite a bit by the company that you worked in?
I was massively.
Yeah.
So the founder, sorry, I'm really bad with this, the founder of that business is a guy called Richard Hicks, and he used to be the HR director of BMW back in the day. He was a massive advocate of looking after the team before you look after anybody else. The cultural elements there. He didn't believe in brand values. He didn't believe in writing stuff down about culture. He just believed in making people's days brilliant. So you would go in, and down the office, he would hire performance actors to come in and pretend to be tea ladies, and then suddenly like whip off their overalls and do backflips down the thing. Like one guy used to moan that the newspaper was wrinkled when he got in the morning, because this was before, everyone used the internet for the news. And he sent someone in to iron the newspaper as a butler and give it to him one day. There was a Hoover that sang in reception, but it was the talk of the town, and they used to have this kind of feeling that I really took with me to everything I did in the future, that was like, how do you make your business feel like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? So how do you, when Charlie's walking past and it's like, the purple puffs of smoke and the gates are closed and everyone's like, what's going on in there? He really inspired me to do, that sort of thing where you can do, just get a reputation through word of mouth and make it a great place to be and make it somewhere where people want to be. That came from there, 100%.
Love that. That's really interesting. And then, so you start this marketing agency, essentially focusing on tech companies. How did you go about starting it? Did you just start as a freelancer, or did you straight away set up the company?
Straight away set up a company. So it was me and my business partner, so 50-50 we started it. He ran the alliances piece for the business. And we literally just started it and went to the biggest competitor of the company that we'd just left and said, do you want to hire the marketing team for that business? And luckily he said yes. So we got a retainer straight out of the gate to do their marketing on a 12-month basis, and that was really the foundation of the business, because there was enough coming in that we could then start to sort of grow and go beyond that. So we very quickly got an office, which I really enjoyed, actually. I think that was a nice thing to do, although you do end up doing a lot of that work. It distracts you from the day-to-day, because you're, working out how to use Sage, or paying the bills, or getting milk, or fixing the loo when it breaks, or there's a lot of that sort of thing that, these sorts of spaces didn't really exist back then, and it would have been an amazing opportunity. It's a great foundation to have that taken away from you, actually, now that these things exist. But it was lovely to have our own space. Culturally, it was very nice as well. So, I did that, and then just hired as fast as we could, because we had that baseline of revenue coming in. And I think that would be a big piece of advice I was just saying to this lady here as well. I definitely hire before you need to. If you've got some comfort that there's some revenue coming in, it's really scary to hire your first person. They feel like they're such a massive deal, that they're going to be culturally really important, that, what happens if I've got to fire them? How does it work? But there are ways to get around it, with them being part-time, or them working flexibly, or get on a contract for a bit before you hire them properly. But you cannot scale, particularly when you're doing everything else underneath, without hiring. So definitely, if you feel even slightly like you can take the risk, I would do it.
So many people on that edge, aren't they? Like, should I wait till I get the revenue? Should I hire first to get the revenue? And sometimes getting that person gives you that accountability push. Like, right now I have to make it work.
It does. And also, it makes you do it. It makes you make it something for them. It can very much feel like it's just you. And it kind of formalises it in a way that nothing else does, I think. When you're making your first invoice, I'm sure some of you here have done it. You sit there and you've got your first invoice you're generating for a customer, and you feel a bit like you're somehow fraudulent. Like, I remember putting 007 on my first invoice rather than 1, so it wasn't really obvious that I'd just...
We've all been there.
And you sort of think, but someone at IBM once put 001 on an invoice. Like, everybody goes through it, but you kind of feel a bit like, you're like, I should, making headed paper on a printer, going, I'm just making this up. And you are, and that's exactly what it's all about. Yeah.
And so tell everybody about the journey in that business. How fast did you grow? How big of a team did you get to, and before you sold?
So we got to about 80, and I exited that business to my business partner. So this deal that I've just done is my first sort of formal exit to private equity or a sort of corporate buyer. It was a really interesting one because it's running a services business is very, very different than running a software business. It's why the second time around I went to the software business. But you cannot scale without hiring. If you're going to sell services, you have to hire people and sell their time. And coordinating that, particularly in a very knowledge-intensive industry, which tech marketing is, as soon as you had somebody good, a client would pinch them. And even if you tried to sue them, you'd lose that contract. And so you end up in a very difficult position where you're constantly hiring. It's all the contingent issues that come with having a huge number of people. If you're not a very process-centric person, it's actually very hard to scale a services business well, in my opinion. And I'm not a very process-centric person at all. No. Jim can tell you that. No, not at all. I'm not. It's not my forte. I know there needs to be a good process, but it isn't something that I'm particularly good at. And I think when you're selling people's time, the control around that, making sure that the utilisation is there, is really, really important. And you end up spending so much time backfilling, or you get a project and everybody wants the same people on it because they're the good people, and it becomes very challenging. I mean, some people do it brilliantly well. WPP are amazing at it. They've really industrialised it. The marketing practice is amazing at it. They've got some brilliant utilisation stuff. If you are running a services business, there's a guy called Neil Backwith who wrote a book all about almost how to do this, how to industrialise a services business, and it's brilliant. So that's really worth reading. I can't remember what it's called, but I'll look it up. He's only written one. He's called Neil Backwith. He used to run countrywide PR, and he really grew that, and I think they sold that to WPP.
Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame, the two different kind of businesses, and actually you've experienced both, so it'll be really interesting to talk about the contrast there. What were your biggest challenges? So as a service business, you're having to hire quite often. It seems like you really seized it at the right opportunity. So during the time when you had the clients and you could get the revenue coming in, was there any really challenging moments? I'm sure there was really challenging moments in that business where you weren't quite sure whether it was going to work out, or did it it just made sense because you seized the opportunity at the right time?
I think when we got to 30 people, that was probably the most challenging time that I remember. Everything breaks. So all the people that you've got, the systems don't work anymore, they don't quite fit together. You're getting bigger clients who demand a different level of service. You're not a kind of boutique anymore. I do remember that being very, very difficult. And I do remember we got a business coach at that point in time who was invaluable, who said, just stop working in the business, stop doing the client work and work on it. And I know that's used great advice, very, very hard to do, particularly when the clients are used to having you. They are at that level, they're still used to having you doing the work. And even now, even in the software world, that can sometimes be a problem. So I do remember that being difficult. I think the other thing, and it's the germ of where Customer Thermometer came from, the other thing that was a real challenge was as we did get towards 80 people, we hired someone to take on some of our biggest customers as a group account director, and it became really quite challenging because he held the relationship with that customer very close, and we weren't really sure what was going on, but you've also got to trust your people, and it was a real mistake. I think we ended up finding that client wasn't very happy. They were an absolutely huge part of our revenue, and we ended up losing them. And I remember wishing at the time, I wish I'd known how they were feeling without having to go through that guy to find out, which is partly where Customer Thermometer came from.
Right, okay, I didn't know that. That's great. Okay, cool. And so talk to us about why you decided to sell. So you sold to your business partner.
I did.
Was that, what?
I think I'd done 9 years at that point. I definitely found it quite stressful. I definitely found it was just getting busier and busier and busier. And I think it was a journey that I'd had enough of. I also decided to have my little boy, and I couldn't, it was hard to see how I was going to do one without feeling guilty about the other. It had a life of its own, an agency of that size that was very much driving towards, millions and millions and millions in turnover. I probably look back on it now and think I would have handled it differently had I not been, younger. I didn't have as many people around me to advise me as I do now. I probably should have found a different way out, but for me, it worked perfectly. It was a good jumping off point, and actually, I'm really grateful that I did, because I did have the idea for CT, and it did give me that. The good thing about a software company is you've got time to grow it. Certainly in the early times, you've got it under your control. It will only grow as fast as you do some marketing or onboard people or do whatever else, and you don't have to have a ton of people around the outside. So there were a lot of things for it that came together for me. The marketing practice is huge now and doing incredibly well. They've just had their own buyout, private equity. They've bought Kingpin. They're rolling along and doing brilliantly. And I will always have founded that, and I'm really proud of it. It's a lovely thing to see. They've got offices in Vancouver and Seattle. It's a nice thing to know that something you started employs hundreds and hundreds of people across the world now, and that they're in a great culture and they're doing really well, partly because of something you did. So there's lots to like about exiting a business if you do it well. And I think that's an important thing. You don't want to exit and feel bad about it if you can possibly avoid it.
And obviously you grew that business with your co-founder, and I mean there's so many things to unpick in that, because having a co-founder at first is great, because starting a business with somebody else is really handy, but as the business grows there can be some challenges. Did you have any challenges there, or reversing that, any tips for people who have co-founders and they might face challenges, things that they can do early on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So early on there were very few challenges. I think once the business, this sounds really naive, but I don't think I realised that the business had value. I just did it because it was an income and it was interesting to me. I didn't necessarily think it was something I could sell. So in the early times like that, you're just doing the job, you're enjoying it. I'd say definitely stick at what you're good at. Really try and find out what that is. And particularly when there's two of you, you don't have to do the things that you're not good at a lot of the time if you're in business with someone that you work with. I think the good thing is we'd worked together for so long before, we knew what each other were good at. So that was quite good. And I think, you also, as the business grows, you go from doing the work to managing the work. I think that's the bit to look out for, because when you're both doing the work, you're just bringing in revenue, you're delivering, it's cool. When you start to manage the business, if you're not very clear about who's doing what, you both end up kind of stepping on each other's toes a little bit, and it can become a bit more challenging. So, and it isn't necessarily that the job you did before you started the business is the job you're going to do when the business gets bigger. That's the other thing. I think I probably thought, well, I'll be the marketing director of this, and actually it didn't suit my skills to do that as much as it did to actually go out and pitch, which I would never have thought before we started it, that turned out to be something I was really good at. So you've got to have your eyes open as the business changes, that you're changing with it. Then there's a little bit of reinvention, and I'd say this throughout my career anyway, like every time something changes, I think you need to go and read a lot of books and step back and go, what do I need to be for this? Not as a person, but there's resilience that you need to build, there's skills that you need to have, there's a sort of determination, but there's also bits that change throughout the business where you're kind of watching it going, okay, in order to do this next bit, I'm going to have to go and do that sort of thing, or I'm going to have to go and make some contacts over here that I didn't have before, or I'm going to have to, when we started getting investment calls for customer Thermometer, the first one that was serious, I think I was almost physically sick. I mean, I literally was kind of going, what happens if I get this wrong? And, now you take them all day long, but the only way I could deal with that was to go and research the hell out of it and make sure that I was on my game when I spoke to them. But there's all of those bits that, you just need to get that bit of reinvention as you go forward.
Yeah, I really want to talk about that. So obviously that first business as it grew, you were getting through your 20s, and obviously learning a lot about yourself and just kind of personal development stuff. What were the most important things for you in terms of personal development that helped you to succeed in that time? So you mentioned obviously researching, reading a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think definitely having a view on improving my resilience was very important. You go from being someone who has worked somewhere, who's potentially freelancing, to someone who every single problem washes up at your door. So, if someone's hubcap has fallen off their car, and this did happen, it becomes your problem because it's in your car park of your office. all the way through to this client is absolutely hopping mad because we've messed something up and you've got to speak to them, and that might be something that you've not, and certainly at that age I had not experienced those things at that level. You can either hide from it or you can embrace it, and I think that was a big part of that personal development for me. I think also just having the confidence that you could walk into a bigger software company and tell them what to do. So I'd come from a 1,000-person software company, but some of the clients for the marketing practice were and are enormous. Microsoft, Atos, the BBC, people like that. And that can feel quite intimidating. You sort of almost don't feel like you are justified having those contracts to a certain extent, or because you haven't worked there. Mm-hmm. And I think, you need to walk in and go, well, they're asking for my help for a reason. Mm-hmm. And maybe they're siloed, or maybe there's something that you're not seeing, and maybe you can go in and help them. But you have to give yourself permission to do that. And that was definitely something that was part of that journey for me.
That's so important, that whole imposter syndrome thing.
Massive.
Same thing with the invoice, charging your first bit of money. Yeah, absolutely. And so just do it is the answer. Just get through it.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it's also just sometimes catching yourself having those thoughts and thinking, did someone at IBM do what I'm about to do? When they founded it.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yes, they did. Okay, crack on.
Everybody's had that starting point. That's
they have. It's important, because I think it's very easy, particularly when things are tough, to just think I'm not up for this. I can't do this. It can get really, really lonely when you're there on your own, hammering away, and you've got people that don't want to buy, or you end up getting customers in the early years that are just really tricky and don't pay you properly. When you're big, you can go, no, do you know what, I don't want that contract. But when you're small, you've absolutely got to take someone who is the bane of your life for 3 years. And it's but that's how you succeed, is just getting the grind, just get on with it.
And you mentioned you didn't have as many people like beforehand supporting you. Now you do. What was the point where you did start to get like mentors or advisors? You mentioned obviously getting a coach for the business, but what about you personally? Did you find people around you that were supporting you towards that?
Yeah, I got better at just reaching out to people. Again, there were fewer networking forums available, but I got better at reaching out to people just on LinkedIn, or if I'd sat next to someone at an event, I would just say, are you struggling with this, or should we have a coffee? So I've never really had a kind of a formal mentor. We tried a few non-execs in the marketing practice, and it never quite worked out for me. They were either there for a really long time, in which case it was the same advice coming back around, or we were swapping them and it became quite expensive. Some people want to do it as a career, which isn't necessarily helpful. So I think you've got to watch out for being derailed as someone's pet project sometimes with that sort of thing. So I was very wary of making sure that anything that I did in that regard was just over a coffee, swapping advice, trying to look out for each other, the sort of offer advice, get it back again, like the startup grind. I think that's quite important. When you're young and doing something like this for the first time, there are people out there that look like they've got very impressive CVs, and some of them are brilliant, but you do have to have your eyes open, because otherwise you can end up accidentally working for someone who's an advisor, and it's hard to get out of that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's talk about Customer Thermometer.
Mm-hmm.
So how long after your last business did you start Customer Thermometer? Did you go straight into it?
2 weeks. Yes.
Great. So you already knew you wanted to start it. You had it in the back of your mind, right?
I had it in the back of my mind, and the beautiful thing about software is you can draw it on a piece of paper, and to my mind, as soon as we sort of started to build something, because I'm not a developer, so you get someone to develop it. If you're going to do that, definitely get a really good non-disclosure agreement in place. I can tell you from the due diligence you're going to need it, but you will always go to someone, try and get someone to help you with that. But it was literally sketching out wireframes of how I wanted the software to work. So inventing it, like, I'm a customer, what will happen, how will I get them, how will they use it, how can we give it, like Slack does now, how can we give it names so that it's cool to use and not boring, how will people upgrade easily, and actually also, how can I build it so that no one will ever ring me? Because what you don't want to do is build something that becomes a nightmare from an overhead perspective. If it's hard to support, or it's hard to sell, or people need to speak to you, that's cool, and you're not going to build a really big software business without that. But while you're wireframing and doing your MVP and trying to get it somewhere, you want to make it as self-sufficient as possible. So recording videos and snippets for YouTube of how to use things and directing people to them, that was really important. And it was a function of me not wanting it to take over my life so soon as I'd sold the last business. I just thought, I've just got out of a very busy, full-on experience. I don't want to be drowned by, because the other thing is, you put it on the internet, it's open to the world. You can have people that expect you to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning because they're in Australia and they don't realise you're not. And you try really hard to look like a big software company. From the day you put it on your website, you try really hard to look trustworthy, professional, big. So you do. So people expect you to have a 24/7 support team, and it's there. You're there in your pajamas. So that's an important thing. Is I think building in some stuff that will help you manage that inbound contact, so that you can spend more time building the software without having to hire a lot of people in the first couple of weeks and months.
So you did that by just creating the processes and having like automatic?
I literally drew it on paper, but down to quite a fine detail, and then went to a couple of people that I knew from the previous world and just said, can you develop something that does this as a sort of minimum product? And then to a designer I knew to design the logo and the website and plugged it together, yeah.
Great, and did it work when you first built it?
No, it didn't work at all. No, I put it on the internet and thought, well, it's there now, people will just buy it, and they didn't at all. So no, we ended up in a position, I guess, where we had to go out and sell it by hand, even though it was on the internet, to get customers on board. This was 10 years ago. One-click feedback, Google reviews, rating stuff wasn't really a big thing, so people weren't looking for it. I just thought of it as a SurveyMonkey killer, really. I'd looked at SurveyMonkey. They appeared to be doing something like $12 million a year with 30 people, and I thought, I'll have a bit of that, please. And I thought, surely people will just want to click one button rather than fill in a really long survey, which now they do, but back then it was a pretty new scenario. So, yeah, I ended up getting in the car and literally going to see people I knew that ran businesses and saying, hello, can I show you this thing? But they always say, if you want money, ask for advice, and if you want advice, ask for money. So I didn't ask for any money originally. I went out and just said, what do you think, and got some feedback. And during that process, a few people, because I wasn't asking them, kind of said, okay, I'll have a look at it, and they gave me some feedback. Then we started to get a few customers on board then. The good thing about it is we built it so that it had our logo in everything that went out. So every single survey that got sent, and that was massive because we had no marketing budget really, so everything that went out had powered by customer Thermometer on it, which had sort of stolen from Hotmail. And that was a really big thing. That page that is still there, that you go to, that just says, hey, the person that sent you this survey is now looking at some feedback and some comments that look like this and look this sort of report, and that really helped enormously. But yeah, it was one step forward, two step back. I think we had the first 3 customers on a sort of rolling MRR, so monthly recurring revenue basis. And then I think 2 of them cancelled the following month, and it was heartbreaking. It's really, really tough, and you just have to keep on going. A lot of people said, why don't you just stop? Because I think for ages it was doing 50 quid a month. Right. And you just have to go, no, we just haven't got it right yet. And how you know that you've got it right is very, the only way it will stop is if you stop, and it's not so much flogging a dead horse as just trying to find a way that's a bit more creative than the last way to reach people, to sell it, to get the message, to network and find different things.
Yeah, just constantly getting that feedback loop and iterating.
Yeah, and I think also gigantically supporting the first customers that use it. So we had a couple of customers who were really difficult, but we just helped them. We did loads of stuff that you wouldn't normally do. We gave them loads of ideas on how to do their CSAT, and we really, really over-delivered. And then all of a sudden you start to get word of mouth. And that was the first sort of inflection point for us, was the North American Cleaning Association. Someone that happened to be quite senior there, and this is a huge organisation, had found it, started using it to check that her cleaners had done a good job when she sent them out to do the various clients they had, and had discovered that it was brilliant because it went like the scenario earlier, over the head of the cleaners directly to the person who'd had the job done. And previously they were leaving comment cards, and if the comment cards were bad, they funnily enough never made it back to the office. So that was the big thing. And so she happened to be on this. We'd really helped her with some stuff. She wanted some big things printing out to stick on her office to incentivize her team. Now normally a software company would go no, and we were like, yeah, we'll do that. So we did those and we sent them to her, and she was so grateful that when she went to the next committee meeting of all the cleaning people in North America, she just raved about it. And I remember waking up one morning and my phone used to ping from Stripe every time we got a deal through, and I opened it up and went, and we just had dozens and dozens, and this is at the point at which we probably had 2 or 3 a week. And we had dozens overnight, and then the next night we had dozens, and then again, and so then we just went mental for cleaners. Like we were just like, right, let's do that. And then, but then you realise that there are these sort of donuts of people that talk to each other. That if you can find influencers, and so, you know, there really isn't a silver bullet for doing it, particularly because we didn't have funding. There isn't a silver bullet if you're just doing it, you know, hand to mouth. You've just got to make the best of every opportunity and over-service people to get that good karma.
Well, a lot of the stuff you described there is kind of this suggestion that startups get around doing things that don't scale at the start because you have to. Because you're just testing, and then you figure out how to scale it later. So at that point, when you were starting to get these dozens of sales coming in, was it just you? Did you have other people?
I think there were 3 of us at that point. So yeah, we had enough of us to cover it globally, and obviously because it was North American and we didn't have anybody over there, so you would sort of like taking it in turns to do support and taking it in turns to pick up the tickets, and it's busy, but also it's kind of, after running a really full-on tech marketing agency where people are like, what's my global strategy for this, and please can I have it by tomorrow? If someone calls you and says, what should I name this thing? It's a bit of joy in comparison, really. So it was actually really quite pleasant. You know, I mean, I don't think there were many times where it wasn't quite pleasant, actually. You don't buy something like Customer Thermometer if you're a bad company. If you don't like hearing from your customers, you're never going to buy it. So we had glorious customers on the whole who were just a joy to work with, and who were actively basically saying to their customers, please complain to me so that I can make things better. And you can't say fairer than that, really. So I think we ended up in this lovely place of you know, and you're, you know, there's not as much expectation with a piece of software as long as it's not broken and it does what it says on the tin. Whereas again, when you're selling services, someone's expectation versus what you pitched can be quite mismatched, and that's quite stressful.
What was your most challenging moment in that business as it was growing?
So, my cron job moment. I still don't even really know what a cron job is. So we had a client who had decided in their wisdom to send out something like 135,000 surveys. And we didn't realise the system's cron job wasn't built to cope with that, because it was very, very early on, and they were a really big client. They were our biggest client, and they sent it to their biggest client. And it got itself stuck in a loop, and it just sent out the surveys again and again and again and again. But it did it in alphabetical order. This is the beauty of it. Like, you can't make this up. It did it in alphabetical order, and the IT director of the business it was going to was called something like Aaron. So Aaron got it more times than anybody else. And so our client rang up and was really, really upset. And I don't think I ate for 3 days. I certainly didn't sleep. It was really, I just thought, this is the end, you know. And actually we got on the phone. We did what we tell our customers to do. We were really open and just said, look, this is what's happened. We'll fix it. We'll stop it. And they're still a customer now. But yeah, that's one of those things where you don't have enough in the back end of the software at that point to control it, because you don't build yourself a great back end. You're constantly adding features for the customer. You're not necessarily controlling it in the back. So we literally, it was like watching something go horribly wrong and going, I can't stop it. Where's the stop button? So yeah, that was pretty bad.
That's very stressful. And so obviously this business was like so different to the last business. How were you different in this business?
I guess I think I probably at this point just figured out how the metrics and what we were trying to grow really, really mattered, and that everything you do in something like customer thermometer or any kind of SaaS business has a massive knock-on effect. So if you change the emails that go out to your prospects from your marketing agency, not a lot changes really. If you change one thing in that funnel, particularly because ours is very, very closely aligned from start to finish, if you change one thing, it can massively have a knock-on through everything else. And I think learning the sort of integrated nature of these sorts of software companies, that was a really big part of me probably understanding that it wasn't, my forte really was in creation. So it was a bit, I suppose it's a bit like what happened at the marketing practice where I went and did the pitching. I think the same thing happened at Customer Thermometer. I realised that I was much better coming up with how do we create more and more propositions that make this interesting to people, because once you've got something that works, it doesn't keep working. So if you're like Salesforce, they have changed their message and what they do, even though fundamentally the software probably, it's changed a bit, but its heart still does the same thing. They've repositioned that, repackaged it, remarketed it, found myriad ways to say the same thing. You have to do that, and that's probably, if I'm good at anything, that's what I'm good at, is working out what's going on in the world and how to fit what we do to it. But that important part, that backbone of start to finish, measuring it, understanding that if you change this, that changes down there, wasn't my forte, and that I shouldn't try and do it because I wouldn't do it very well. So we brought in a chief exec at that point, Jim, to sort all that out for us, and it just changed the world completely. It made it clear to us where things were going wrong, because if you can't see that, you can't change it. You might intuit it a little bit. You might think, oh, something's changed there. You have to be able to see it, because as soon as you've got any kind of traction, you're flying blind without data. Yeah. You really are. It's a very, very data-driven business.
It's much more much more scientific and metric-based than a service company, right?
It hugely, but I think there are nuances around. Even if you slightly change how you position what goes out, what people then expect to see when they're in the software can be really quite different. Right. Or you might say, well, this bit of the funnel here isn't performing very well, so let's take that away. But what you don't realise in taking that away is that they're then looking for it down here and it isn't there anymore, because it's gone. Yeah. So I'll try to think of a good example. So I think we've definitely seen that, as with most software as a service, you get a trial, right? So you've got a trial period, and it can be 1 week, 2 weeks, whatever. Most customers will either buy it and then figure out how it works, or they'll figure out how it works and then they'll buy it. But you usually have to optimize your SaaS tool for one of those routes. And if you do, you end up not being able to cater for the other one very effectively. It's a continuum of, how familiar am I with this product? How quickly can I get to success? Yes, but how familiar am I? But what no one really looks at is in any SaaS business, people will buy, even with the business that we're in now with Exclaimer, everyone will buy at different points along that journey. So you need to give them opportunities to do so. And that's definitely something that I don't think we'd have spotted if we didn't have the data in place. Because, you end up having people that you think are salespeople doing support, because they've already, they're very familiar with it, but they haven't bought yet. So you kind of help, and then vice versa. You end up with someone who's done the deal on the phone, and then someone's ringing them up going, hey, well, I've just bought it, so can you just help me do this, and this, and that's the support thing. So I think we ended up very much blurring the lines between customer service and support and sales as a direct result of the data that Jim surfaced, because we could suddenly see that was what was going on.
Great. And so you bring in a CEO, which is a big move. What was, obviously we understand why you did it. What was that transition like? So you were acting as CEO before, brought somebody in. What was that transition like for you?
It changed the game completely. I mean, it provided an industrialised platform for the business that we didn't have before, and it enabled us to work out what we were doing that worked and what we were doing that didn't work. To a certain, I mean, there's always bits that you can't quite, ever know. And there are always really lovely random things that happen where someone says, oh, I found out about your business through someone that I was having dinner with last night. There are, and you should really try and encourage those things. I know it sounds a bit glib, but when you don't have much marketing budget or much money, those are the things that make all the difference in the world, actually. But yeah, we ended up having a really industrialized platform. We definitely hired more freely than we had done before, because I don't love hiring people, despite the fact that I've said you should. I know you should, but I'm not very good at it, but you need people that are. And so we did have someone that was, and so we built an awesome team, and all of a sudden we were getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because we were able to just replicate based off the data, but also off the great people in the team. I think the other thing is, a software company is great because you can have more time to spend on the culture. You know, you can invest in that sort of thing. You can have an ethos around the way that you service people. Yeah. Again, in a services agency, if you're on long-term clients, you end up absorbing a bit of their culture, and that's a bit more difficult. But yeah, that platform for growth, that ability to understand what's going on, and that sort of, I think as well, you know, for me, the freedom to do some of those things again, that were like, how do I make this appeal in a world that's suddenly full of Net Promoter? Yeah. How do I make it appeal in a world that's suddenly full of, you know, customer experience became a word during the growth of CT. Now, we didn't have that on our website, but then we did, because I had time to go and look at that. So definitely freeing yourself up to focus on the things that you're good at. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about your acquisition. So happened a year ago.
Yep.
How did it come about? What was it like? Stressful, I presume, as they all are.
Yeah, it was one of these things that I know so many words now, not even swear words, that I didn't know before. But, you know, there are words that get bandied around during an acquisition that, you know, you don't know, like all sorts of ones around the due diligence and some of the accounting terms and all the rest of it that I now understand. It really demystified it. I think, you know, you definitely have more power than you think you do in an acquisition. That's one thing I've definitely learned from both experiences. But yeah, it was amazing. So we decided to take the company to market. We realized the tech market was really going strong. The business was in a great place. Customer experience, customer feedback, you know, the kind of metrics that people look to buy businesses on change over time, not just what number they're looking for, but the actual metrics themselves. SaaS is really, really, really mature now compared to where it was when I started CT. There were very few SaaS businesses out there, maybe SurveyMonkey and Salesforce were the big ones, but there weren't very many others. Now you can read blogs on what stats you should be looking for and all the rest of it. So yeah, all the numbers that we had aligned with what people were looking for in the market, and so we just decided to give it a go and put the company on the market with a banker, and they took it out for us, and we were inundated. I mean, we were doing phone calls at sort of 11 o'clock at night on Christmas Eve to you do these big pitches to people, and that's fairly terrifying. You feel like it's the biggest pitch you'll ever do until you do the fifth one, and then but you spend a lot of time grooming the business for sale, putting the sort of almost like if you were selling your house, like a house brochure together to sort of explain to people what it does and how it works. There's a huge amount of pride in that. Cover up the damp, yeah, a bit of that filler stuff. But you end up being really proud about what you've built, because it's the first time you stop and look back. It's that whole emptying the ocean with a teaspoon, and all you see is the ocean, and you never look back at what you've emptied. And that's a point when you do, and it's important to stop and have a look at that, I think. So yeah, we did that, and we very, very quickly got some offers in, and one of them was from a company that we were already a partner of. They always say, someone will buy you. And I often used to think that wasn't true, and if I look back in both times, that's been the case. And it's the case for a lot of other entrepreneurs I know. So, and I would not have said that even 5 years ago. We'd had a relationship with them for a long time, but all of a sudden their game as an Exclaimer's game changed very quickly. They were bought out by private equity. They're on a massive track now. They're growing incredibly quickly. So they were very, very keen to acquire us, and it was a really good fit for the technology. It just worked really well together. We already had a relationship. We knew a lot of people there. We knew that they were a really good company. So, and they were in the UK, which was great. We weren't going to have to, because everyone we've got is in the UK, wouldn't have. But they had global reach. They've got offices in Miami, Singapore, Sydney, Netherlands. So it meant we could suddenly access a whole global sales channel that we didn't have before. So there were lots and lots of reasons to like it. And it was a fascinating process. I think we're very lucky that we had the data that we did, and that Jim had put the work in that he had, because the due diligence was, I think, relatively from what I understand from other people that have gone through it, the due diligence was relatively lightweight. I don't mean that it wasn't thorough, but it took about 4 weeks from the letter of intent to closing the deal, which is pretty rare. So yeah, but it was a not sleeping 4 weeks. Yeah, it was. And definitely save everything. Even if you just save everything, and make sure you've got NDAs for everything, because you'll thank yourself. Yeah. And even things like measuring customer satisfaction, if you get a nice email from a customer, save it. It's amazing how much the stuff that we had was able to, because they might ask for something in the due diligence and you sort of think, I haven't really got that. Yeah. But then you've got something that's similar and they're perfectly happy with that, so they're not expecting it to be perfect. I think that's the thing. I kind of had this, I'm handing in my homework, I need an A+. Yeah. And actually they're very happy with, this is what we've got, but these are the reasons we haven't got it. And as long as you can justify it, it was actually, you can actually have a conversation in due diligence. It isn't a handing over chapter and verse and then having it given back to you with a, this is or this is not good enough. They will just keep asking questions and understand why you don't have it. And as long as you've got a good explanation for that and it's not on their critical path, it's fine.
That's really interesting to know. I haven't heard anybody explain it like that. That's great. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you're an avid reader.
I am.
Talk about development. What kind of stuff are you reading at the moment?
So, for my work, I'm thrillingly reading the AI Marketing Canvas.
Bloody hell.
I know. So we're doing some work in that space, and it's not a space that I've been familiar with. Customer Thermometer.
Just to clarify to everyone, you're still working with Customer Thermometer for a little while.
Yeah, so my role, so for the first 6 to 9 months after acquisition, we were kind of left as an entity while, we were sort of integrated. Exclaimer had just been through its own buyout from a Insight venture, which backed Twitter and, really, really big guys. So they were going through all of the sort of washout from that. So we carried on running the business and just gradually got to know our colleagues in Exclaimer, and now we're sort of merging into a unit. They've literally acquired another business 2 weeks ago called Periodic, which is like a Calendly competitor. Okay. So we're welcoming those guys in, and they're joining all of our teams. So that's quite nice to be able to sort of share our acquisition experience with them. So that's kind of
so
what is going on.
In Customer Thermometer, and that's why you're learning about AI?
No, so I am still doing some Customer Thermometer work, particularly around the product, but they've asked me to lead the product development for the group, so where we take all the product sets going forward. So since November I've been doing that.
Wow.
It's great actually, it's very different than running a business, but also there's some real freedom to it because you're not responsible for the revenue and everybody's salaries, and actually after 20 years that's quite nice, and it allows you to be creative again and do some work on that front. So, my role's kind of a bit hybrid at the moment between the two, but that's what I'm doing.
Cool. Right, AI. Anything else? Any personal development books that you think everyone should read?
Oh yeah. So if you don't like public speaking, which I used to really be terrified of, How to Own the Room by Viv Kroiskop is absolutely amazing. I love that one. Just trying to think if there's anything else I would really... do you know what? I still love The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. I know that it's a bit old hat now, but I think there's some really good things in there about making work on your terms. Customer Thermometer was definitely inspired by him. And reading that book and thinking, hang on a minute, there is a different way to doing this. I'm massively associated with what he describes in the front part of that book of just being on this, even though it was my business, of this hamster wheel that I built for myself. And I guess what I would say is, I don't think you can ever work 4 hours a week, and even he's said that, not if you want to do the kind of exits and stuff but it can feel like it is, and it can be much more on your terms. And I think even today I was discussing the fact that when you are in a role, which I am now, I'm like I said, I'm employed. I'm not sure I'm questioning enough right now. Is it on my terms enough, or are there things that I should be doing or going out and doing? I think the pandemic's not been helpful for that either. I think 4-Hour Workweek's still really up there for me, just in terms of making you think about what you're doing and what you're doing with your time.
Yeah, brilliant book, love it. So, a couple more final questions before we go to Q&A. So have a think about what you want to ask Lindsay. I really want to know what's next for you. Obviously, you're doing this thing now. What's cooking in there? What are you thinking? Do you think you might start another business at some point in the future?
Oh God, yeah. Definitely. I don't know what yet, but it's a really big part of who I am, and I love that part of it, and I love that. Do you know what I think the big thing is? Being able to make a culture that's awesome is really dear to my heart, and I want to more than actually what is the product. That's the big part that I really want to go and do again, because that's been a kind of heartbeat through my career. But there's also a huge amount to go with what we're doing at Exclaimer, and I don't want to. This is a huge opportunity, even though sometimes it is quite hard. The transition from being your own boss to doing what I'm doing now is quite, you have to have a word with yourself sometimes. You have to just sort of say, this is sort of a different situation, but it's okay. Yeah. I'm learning so much about how you have a full-on board meeting with 30 people from private equity, what that looks like, how that comes together, the work that goes into the board pack, the due diligence they do, the board observers. There's a huge amount of value in it in terms of professional development and experience that you don't want to sell yourself short of. So there's a long way to go, and I also think how you take what is already a multi-million-dollar business at Exclaimer and grow it at scale and at pace, and what that looks like and how that feels. It's a rare opportunity, and it's definitely out of my comfort zone for sure. I've run relatively small businesses compared to where I am now, and certainly compared to where it's going. But it's a really worthwhile experience having. And when things are tough, I think you have just got to go, I want this experience, so I'm willing to go through the sort of the harder times around it. And you like I say, you sell the business, you imagine you'll probably work a bit less and put your feet up a bit more, and it hasn't been like that, but that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. It's like realizing that you've chosen.
This is it. You and I have, and you do. I think that's the other thing, when things are really difficult in the early times, and you're bashing away at the coalface of your own business on your own. I think the thing to do is go, look, I chose this, and actually that's very liberating. Yeah. It can give you that extra energy to carry on, because you did choose it, and you have done it, and you have sent that 007 invoice out and all of those sorts of things. So you keep on going.
Lindsay, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your questions. That has been super insightful. Thanks for joining us this evening.
It's a pleasure.
Everybody please give Lindsay a big round of applause.